being applied is the gear switching. So we all know that there are certain gears that are known to be very high risk gears, such as the gillnet. And therefore, there is usually a requirement that during specific period of the time, or in certain areas where they are doing fishing, they strictly ensure that they only allow certain type of gears, and that is from maybe gillnets to only allowing long lines that are less risky in terms of bycatch issues. So the other non-technical approach that is also being applied across the globe is the binding and non-binding measures. And these include use of national legislation, ratifying to international agreements, as well as using consumer campaign, where you ensure that whatever you are actually fishing is you actually sensitize the consumer against maybe buying certain products that have not used the right, probably the right gear and the right method of fishing, and therefore that enhances or rather ensures that bycatch mitigation is actually enhanced. So the other non-technical strategy that is also used is adhering to, for example, Food and Agriculture Organization, United Nations best practice advice. So you ensure that those who are engaging in fishing are practicing, or they are practicing best practice in when they are doing fishing. So beside the non-technical strategies that are used to reduce bycatch mitigation, there are also other technical methods that are also being used to ensure that bycatch mitigation is enhanced. And some of these include acoustic deterrent. And some of the acoustic deterrent that are in place include use of alarms, or if you will, the pagers. And these pagers are applied, or they are put on the fishing nets. And the idea behind this is to act as an alarm, so that they deter, or they deter the potential threatened species from coming close to the fishing nets. That's very sensitive to sounds or to noise, and therefore, when these alarms are put, they tend to deter them. So the other method that is also being applied is the playback of the predators to deter any potential threatened marine species from coming closer to the fishing net by playing these playback sounds, so that they behave like there is a predator close to the net, and therefore they will actually avoid this kind of they will avoid these nets. And this strategy is also applied mostly also in the terrestrial ecosystem. For example, when you want to know, you want, this is if you're doing surveys of animals, and you are doing surveys of animals that are very shy, for example, leopards or lions. So the only way to know their numbers, for example, is by using playback on the playback sounds, so that you play them like a radio, and they act like there is a predator that is in distress, and therefore you will attract the animals. So in the same approach, and this is also applied among the marine mammals, Unfortunately, this approach has its own challenges. For example, if you want to deter a certain marine mammal, let's say a cetacean or, for example, dolphin. So the playback predator sound can attract other species like pinnipeds or sea lions and the like that would think that there is already a meal, and therefore it has these. It has a challenge in that it can also, as you try to avoid one marine mammal, you could also be attracting another marine mammal, and therefore this can be a challenge, especially where you have diversity of marine mammals within one geographical range. So the other technical method that is also being applied are the passive acoustic, and these include passive acoustic in that you put some acoustic reflection on the nets so that they deter any potential target marine mammal from coming close to the nets. So the other strategy can also be used are the exclusion devices on the trawler nets, and this is also very common among the sea turtles. We have sea turtle exclusion devices. So depending on the species that you are actually targeting, in this case, the marine mammals, you can also have, they have all the application of exclusion devices on the trawler nets have also been used to exclude potential marine mammals. So the fifth technical method that is also applied are the weakened gears, so that you have nets that are so weak in that they can allow some marine mammals to get free if they are caught within the net, and they're able to break off from those nets without much of a struggle, and therefore that allows them, that prevent them from being caught by the fishing nets. So beside the bycatch mitigation, the other management strategy that is also applied is the creating alternative livelihood for fishers. So if you want, I mean, the reason people go for fishing is because they want to earn a living. And if you want, for example, to close certain fishing grounds for a specific period of time, because probably that's when there is migration of certain species of marine species, mammalian species, then you have to create an alternative livelihood for the fishers, and especially this applies to mostly to the developing countries. So elimination of human-induced mortality is therefore urgently needed, especially for small isolated population of mammals. So the goal, this goal of creating alternative livelihood for fishermen is challenging in that. Let me. Computer is running out of power. Sorry. So, like I was saying, this approach of creating an alternative livelihood for fishers is challenging for fisheries, especially in developing countries where extensive multi-gear fisheries is very active, where sometimes you have all manner of gears being used actively throughout the year. And therefore, professional fishing is not only about getting food or putting food on the table and generating income, but it's also a source of cultural identity. Therefore, sometimes it's difficult for you to ask a community that is already used to a certain way of life. They are actually fishermen by nature, and you want them to change to another alternative form of livelihood, and therefore this is actually very challenging. And therefore, changing the behavior of fishermen requires not only awareness. You need to do a lot of education and awareness and exposure to ecosystem-based thinking, but it also requires alternative modes of income generation and source of food. You have to give them an equally attractive source of income for them to avoid probably fishing during a certain period of the year when you think it's most risky for the marine mammals. So therefore, there is need to understand and incorporate the needs of the fishermen when you're doing or considering the alternative livelihoods and their community, so that fishers are able to transition from the new livelihood needed to achieve the required levels of bycatch reduction. So for you to convince fishers that they can actually engage in an alternative form of earning or gaining, putting food on the table, you really need to do quite a lot of awareness, education, and trying to change the thinking of the fishers so that they can actually embrace the alternative livelihood that you will be proposing. So alternative income generation activities that have been tried and they seem to be working include alternatives such as seaweed farming, so that it's less intrusive, and therefore this could be one of the strategies that can be used as an alternative livelihood to the fishers, or switching to pond aquaculture so that they can actually stop you venturing in the sea during certain period of the year, and therefore they can still put food on the table by engaging in alternative fishing activities such as use of the pond aquaculture. Or you can actually begin even farming, different forms of farming such as vegetable or fruit farming, and therefore, like I was saying at the beginning, sometimes it's very difficult to change a certain way of life, and especially changing people who are used to a certain way of life to an alternative way. And therefore, that's why you need a lot of education and awareness for them to embrace these alternative livelihoods. Or they can actually engage in activities such as handicraft activities, and also encouraging the community to embrace education and try and convince maybe the young generation to switch from fishing and do other different occupations. Like, they can actually engage in getting employed and working in different sectors other than just focusing on fishing as the only form of livelihood. The third strategy that is also being advocated, and it's also applied a lot, is the use of spatial management for conservation. So spatial management for conservation is one of the most common approaches in marine mammals, and it has been shown to have varying success. So marine and spatial management for conservation include strategies such as marine protected establishment of marine protected areas, or single sector spatial planning like we have with the ICZM, or even a dynamic management approaches. So when you look at strategies such as establishment of an MPA may be designed purposely to protect marine mammals, either directly or by targeting threats, or indirectly through management of management goals that may reduce impact on the marine mammals, such as prohibition of fisheries that results in bycatch of marine mammals. So we all know the regulations that are applied in marine protected areas. For example, in the case of different countries have got different regulations, but they are more or less the same in most of the countries. But when you look at an example like in Kenya, when you establish a marine protected areas, it comes with a lot of regulations, such as it limits how much you can actually access or derive from such a marine protected areas. And therefore, when you have a marine protected area, there is protection of certain species because there will be reduced pressure in terms of fishing, depending on the nature of the marine park. So the other approach that can also be used is the mobile and flexible MPAs. May be a critical tool for accommodating shifting marine mammals distribution as a result of climate change, so that you have it's not a fixed marine protected area, but it's a more mobile and flexible MPA, but it's only applied when you have maybe marine mammals or marine species, certain marine species migrating or visiting certain areas. And during that time, you apply these mobile and flexible MPAs in order to protect those species. The other essential concept that can be applied in spatial management for conservation is the identification of what we call important marine mammal areas, just like we have with the important bird areas. So this concept, there are certain areas within the sea that are also known to be important marine mammal areas, and such areas can be protected, even if they are not protected as marine protected areas per se, but if they can be identified, just the same way we identify important bird areas, for example, or important biodiversity areas. We also have important marine mammal areas, and such areas can enhance protection of marine mammals. So important marine mammal areas basically refers to the discrete portion of habitat that are important to marine species that have the potential to be delineated or managed for conservation purposes. And therefore, what I'm saying is that these are just a replica of important bird areas or important biodiversity hotspots or areas that are known to have very high biodiversity. And such areas can actually be the first process in maybe identifying them to be ideal for marine protected area, as to qualify for marine protected areas. However much this approach may be good, it has again its own limitation. This approach of using spatial management approach or use of MPAs to protect marine species has a number of limitations. And the first one is that marine mammals are often impacted by multiple human threats simultaneously, so resulting in additive or cumulative impact on the individual or population. So you may have, you may establish a marine protected areas, just like we have in Kenya. For example, you have Mombasa Marine Park, but just because you have a Mombasa Marine Park, it doesn't mean that that area is devoid of any threats. Considering that when you look at the threats that are impacting on the marine mammals, they are quite diverse. And for example, one of them could be pollution. But just because you have a Mombasa Marine Park, that does not make it free of those other threats like pollution. You are all aware that because of the location of Mombasa Marine Park, for example, considering it's very close to an urban city, it's subjected to a lot of pollution, and therefore this is one of the challenges that, in as much as you may establish an MPA, it may have challenges associated with those other threats. So, and therefore the threat that exists within an MPA, and this is what I was saying, is that, such as pollution or climate change, may originate outside the area that you have designated as an MPA, and therefore may be beyond the jurisdiction or the capability of the management agency. It's beyond. I mean, it's beyond the management of. Let's say Kenya Wildlife Service is in charge of the marine parks, and therefore it requires intervention at another level. For example, you need to engage, for example, NEMA to ensure that the pollution in the marine park is tackled, but Kenya Wildlife Service may not be able to do that on its own. So the other limitation with the spatial management approach is that population level impact of management action can be difficult sometimes to assess, given the highly mobile nature and long generation time of some marine species. So the fourth important strategy that is also applied globally is what we refer as the ex situ conservation. Are we still there?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
So what is ex situ conservation? We have ex situ conservation and in situ conservation. So when you talk of in situ conservation, we are talking about conservation of whatever nature, but within the natural settings. But in the event that a certain species is highly endangered, and this is only in very extreme events, we can apply what we are calling ex situ conservation. So ex situ conservation refers to management of species outside its natural habitat for conservation purposes. And therefore, sometimes this kind of approach can be challenging for some species. You can imagine thinking of an ex situ conservation for a blue whale. It requires, I mean, it's logistically very, very complex to do that. And therefore, as much as this is a good approach in reducing, and this has also been applied also in terrestrial ecosystem. So this applies only in a situation where the species at hand is at very high risk. So, and I will give an example, I like referring often to terrestrial ecosystems so that you get to understand what kind of application has been used. So ex situ conservation has been used, especially with highly endangered species like rhinos, where you put them in a setting that they are highly managed, so that you can breed them, and after that they can be released back in the wild. The young ones can be released back in the wild. So in this approach, the individuals are removed from their natural habitat and they are put in a safe area for purposes of breeding. And the breeding program is established, And after they succeed in breeding them, the offspring are returned to the wild only in the event where the threats have been reduced or eliminated. So ex situ management can be sometimes be very controversial, and it has received a lot of mixed feelings about especially those who are concerned about the welfare of the animals, because such effort may be perceived, usually perceived to be diverting a lot of resources from efforts to conserve the species in their natural habitat at the expense of doing this in ex situ setups. And therefore, like I just said earlier, this is a strategy that is actually valid, but it's only valid for species that are at very high risk of extinction, and therefore the aim is to try and see and ensure that that particular species does not get extinct. So, and therefore, IUCN have defined ex situ conservation or management as condition under which individuals are spatially restricted with respect to their natural spatial pattern or those of their progeny, and they are removed from many of their natural ecological processes and are managed on some level, but they are managed by humans, and therefore they are kind of domesticated. That's what basically this means. They are domesticated for the purposes only of breeding them and returning the offspring in the natural habitat. So this approach is feasible for some marine mammals, as well as it has been practiced very well in a terrestrial ecosystem, and therefore, even in marine ecosystem, it's actually still feasible. For example, this has been done temporarily, where temporary holding of the stranded pinnipeds to treat them against the injuries, diseases, or malnutrition, or impact from whatever threats such as oil pollution, and then they are released back in their natural range, or they are assessed for disease screening. And this is happening in so many areas. And even when you look at in Kenya, for example, we have a classical example where we have the Watamu Turtle Watch. They usually capture all the injured sea turtles, and I don't want to get into this so much because we'll be looking at the sea turtle as a unit. But I just wanted you to understand what ex situ management is all about. So the idea behind this is that the Watamu Turtle Watch will put the injured turtles in holdings, and they will actually treat them against malnutrition, or they will treat them against distress, or they will screen them if they have diseases. And if when they are able to now, when they are free of those challenges, then they're released back in the wild. So while this approach is also very promising, it also has its own challenges or limitation. So the first one is that the scale, size, and the number of facilities that are needed to adequately house sufficient animals to maintain a genetic diversity in captive population make captive breeding for reintroduction unlikely for very large marine mammals. Like I was telling you, when you think of doing this for, let's say, blue whales that are highly endangered, or they are critically endangered, it's sometimes practically very prohibitive. Number two is that successful release of the captive born animals into the wild always tend to pose challenges due to the complex pattern of the social behavior. So an animal that has been cultured or has been brought up in a captive facility will have challenges adjusting in the natural ecosystem. And therefore, in as much as it's a good concept where you can breed and increase the numbers, it becomes challenging when you decide now to release these animals back in the wild. So used is application of the animal welfare science. So conservation effort for wild marine mammals population need to be inclusive, even in as much as when we are doing conservation, we need to also put into consideration the welfare of the animals. Have animal rights, and therefore co-option of the animal welfare as a science need to be part of the conservation as a whole. So the welfare science of individuals can inform conservation management of the population. And therefore, there is actually need to combine animal welfare science with the natural conservation science and other forms of science. So conservation and welfare tend to share similarities and should be considered in unison so that it doesn't appear like you're doing conservation on one hand, but as you do conservation, it's deficient of the welfare. It has to be done hand in hand. Conservation and welfare should move hand in hand in as far as marine mammal conservation is concerned. And therefore, there is need to find a common ground among the conservationists, those who are ecologists and the like, the veterinarians. For example, when it comes to the captive animals that you're putting in the ex situ facilities. So the other professionals like vets to come and take care of these animals that are injured. And that applies also. When you look at an institution like Kenya Wildlife Service, it has got diversity of human resource. We have scientists that are ecologists or biologists. We also have vets that are used in the translocation of animals and treating of the animals in distress. Scientists that are much concerned. We have a whole body of care for the animals. When if you're caught mistreating animals, there is a regulations that you can be prosecuted for doing that. So the other strategy that is also being used is monitoring of and sampling in the field. So this monitoring of presence or absence of certain marine mammals does also contribute a lot to conservation of the marine mammals. So effective management of marine mammals with diverse habitat ranges depends on the sharing of the species data and environmental information on data, both at local, regional, and global level. So there is, when you are monitoring animals that have got very high habitat ranges, it requires intervention at regional level. If this particular animal is a regional visitor of, let's say, Western Indian Ocean, you will have to do monitoring, not just in the Kenyan coastline, but you'll have to have a synchronized monitoring activities across the region or across the global ranges, such that the scientists in the Western Indian Ocean are able to collaborate with the scientists that are in other parts of the globe, so that as we monitor, for example, the whales, whatever data is being collected or is being captured in Western Indian Ocean or within the coastal Kenyan coastal region is the same kind of data that is also collected elsewhere, and therefore these and the data that is available for management purposes, and ensuring that the threats that are facing these animals is known. So research shows that there are evidence suggesting that data synthesis are very effective at identifying research and as well as conservation priorities for these particular species of marine mammals. So there is therefore need to create a strong and relevant communication and messaging platform for all marine mammal scientists, so that whatever information is being collected in Kenya should be the same kind of information and data that is also being collected by the Tanzanian counterparts or Seychelles or any other part of the world where these particular animals are visiting, so that it's not a disjointed form of sort of information that we are collecting on these particular animals. In the long run, the data set that is collected should be made available within a global repository database, so that this data is actually available to everyone, as long as there is collaboration and guidelines on how to use that data. So such databases ensures longevity and the quality of the data that is maintained and linked to other platforms worldwide. So the other strategy that is also being used is the IUCN red listing assessment, ensuring that these species that are considered to be threatened are subjected from time to time to what we refer as the IUCN red listing. Just because certain species have been red listed and have been considered to be, because we are dealing with a threatened species, meaning they have already been assessed. That is not the end of the story. They need to be assessed from time to time. And that's why we have these specialist group that keep updating information about these species that are of concern. So as much as we already know that certain species are either critically endangered, or they are endangered, or they are vulnerable, or they are of no concern, in as far as this unit is concerned, we are only concerned about species that are threatened. But that does not mean that species that are threatened should not be assessed. And therefore, what this means is that we need to keep updating this information all the time. And that is the purpose of having the IUCN species specialist groups. So the IUCN red list is, we all know that IUCN Red List is a global gold standard that is used for characterizing conservation status of the species and their ecosystem. So assignment of threatened classification status can spur conservation action. When an animal is known to be threatened, because it has been subjected to a thorough assessment. Once it is listed as threatened, it is possible to come up with a proper management action aimed at ensuring that that species does not deteriorate further. Or it can also lead to urgency and credibility of a regional recovery program. When we have species, we have management strategies for different species. We have management strategies, for example, of sea turtle and other species that are of concern. This red listing informs those management plans. It also informs different research projects and as well as funding. So when you look at the funding of if you want to do research in focusing on threatened species, you have higher chances of getting funding for that, especially if you are dealing with a threatened species as compared to another person who is probably focusing on a species that is considered to be of least concern. So a species that has been classified as threatened will have a better chances of, let's say, getting funding because you will actually be enhancing the conservation of that particular species. So red listing has been designed as a widely accepted and practical way to help all different stakeholders to set priorities for conservation actions. Well, the other strategy that is also requires, or rather it's that is being used, is the adoption of science outreach and advocacy. So we focus so much on research, but research should not be an end to itself. It's supposed to be informing the society, or it's supposed to be informing us on the strategies that should be used in applying the strategy that should be used in managing these threatened species. And therefore, there is need, even after we have done research, it should not be the end of the story. And even as we design and plan to do research, we should not just design it on our own. We need to consult with other stakeholders so that we also put there, so that we know what the needs are. So very often, the role of science stops with providing evidence. And more often than not, we do research, then we say that we have done our part. So we are leaving the policymakers to do what they want with that data or with that information. But the big question is, should that be the case? Should that be the case? Hello? Are you guys there?
Yes, we're here.
Yes.
So is research?
Pardon, I can't hear you well.
You can't hear me? Hello?
Hello.
What I'm asking, do you agree that the role of science should stop with providing evidence? And after that, the policymakers or the management is supposed to act, to use that to act Or are we a scientist? If you want to be a scientist, are you supposed to be part of the decision making?
I think it should extend to decision making because sometimes the policymaker might not understand the best way to apply what has been provided as an evidence by the scientific community. And so I tend to disagree that scientists should just stop at providing the evidence alone.
Yeah, but very often that's very true. That approach, actually, that argument is very true. But when you look at things on the ground, very often scientists tend to work in their sort of their own cocoon, and they are actually very busy providing facts, providing science, providing evidence. And then after that, they don't do much. And therefore, when it comes to science outreach, this is where scientists need to come in. That's why we need to have forum or platforms where they can share their results. And they should not just be sharing these results to other scientists who can understand that jargon. When we have, for example, like WIOMSA symposium that is usually done every 3 years, it's not just about scientists coming or congregating together to come and share what they have been doing for the past 3 or so years. They also call all those other stakeholders, policymakers and the like, so that they can actually unpackage this science that they're providing evidence about in a language that can be understood by laymen or people who are not science oriented, and therefore, but they can still make decisions, because you need, for example, when you talk of politicians, when you are unpackaging this information to politicians or to the CSs, for example, it has to be done in a way that is understandable or to people of that caliber. So, and therefore, it's just a misconception or a notion that is not actually not correct, that scientists should only, their role should only be to provide evidence, but rather they should work hand in hand with the policymakers so that their science can be seen to be adding value or changing the status quo. So scientists must, from the onset, when you are beginning or deciding that this is what we want to do or this is what we want to research on, they should engage with all relevant stakeholders so that they understand what are the challenges. That's why when you look at the setup of our institutions, we have the fisheries service, and we also have the KEMFRI. Those two institutions are supposed to be working hand in hand so that the needs of the fisheries service can be understood by the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, so that even as they research, they are doing research that is already as a need, has been identified as a need by the fisheries service, and that applies also to other institutions like Kenya Wildlife Service. I don't know whether you are aware that Kenya Wildlife Service has been working as one institution, but I think from this month, from last month, there are two institutions now. We have Kenya Wildlife Service Research Institute, that is actually so it's like a replica of KEMFRI, but focusing on wildlife conservation. And therefore, I want you to be on the lookout now that you guys are just about to exit. They will be advertising very soon because it's becoming now an autonomous parastatal on its own, free from Kenya Wildlife Service. And therefore, they are supposed to be addressing problems that have been highlighted by the Kenya Wildlife Service, so that you're not just doing research for the sake of research. And therefore, scientists are therefore supposed to work hand in hand with all relevant stakeholders, ranging from the policymakers to the general public. And this applies both locally, nationally, and internationally. And therefore, that's why we even have these when you have this symposium, we have locally organized symposium, we have nationally organized symposium, and we also have internationally organized symposium, so that people can share at different levels and can learn from one another when they are sharing these data in those platforms. So scientific advice should be offered when data are imperfect, noting that the incomplete knowledge does not justify inaction by managers. So just because you don't have perfect data, for example, you've been doing monitoring, but you have not been able to actually know the trends clearly. But such kind of data can still be used to inform decisions. And you're all aware that application of precautionary principle is used where you don't need perfect data to make decisions about management interventions. And in the same breath, there is also need to adopt adaptive management for effective conservation management of marine mammals. The other approach that is very commonly used is application of technology. Technology is becoming very handy when it comes to conservation of marine mammals. And one of the technologies that is in use is the application of both the satellite and the drone imagery technology. Use of drones and use of satellite imagery to manage marine mammals. So in the recent past, the use of technology, particularly satellite technology and drone technology, was a preserve of military, because it was considered to be very intrusive, and it was also considered to be very costly. But as we move on, the world has become a global village, and the expensive and the expensive cost of acquiring satellite imageries have become very cheap currently. For example, the use of Google Earth. If you have a phone, it's actually very possible to actually assess. You can actually, if you use Google Earth, you can actually know where you are and those kind of stuff. So that shows that these satellite imagery are becoming easily accessible, and they are also become very, very cheap. So the decreasing costs and the increasing resolution of sensors and the expanding global coverage and the availability of these imagery are now making it possible for researchers in the field of marine to use satellite imagery to safely and efficiently study the marine mammals. So one of the technology that is actually being used is the Earth observation satellite. So several studies have successfully employed the satellite data to investigate the marine mammal distribution and density remotely. So the other technology that is also used is the use of drones, or if you will, what you're referring as the unoccupied aircraft system. So at present, we have use of drone is being used again to detect and count marine mammals. So if, like I just mentioned earlier, this kind of technology was a preserve of military, and especially not just any military, but usually the US military. So, and therefore they used to regulate a lot on the kind of technology, or rather the kind of satellite and use of certain regulation on how to use some of these drones. But there's still a lot of controversy surrounding this technology, but there is a lot of improvement, and we'll continue to have improvement as we move forward. So the other technology that is also being used is application of biologging and telemetry technology. So when you look at this figure here, biologging devices provide a suite of data useful for marine mammal conservation. So it's possible, when you look at this mammal here, is a sea otter, which is being monitored remotely using biologging. They use tags. It has some satellite tags, and therefore their movement and use of habitat can actually be monitored remotely. So when you look at this figure, what you have is the movement of this particular animal. Only this particular animal within the coastal region of the Northern Sea in the United Kingdom. So you can actually monitor the habitat utilization, the distribution, how far they go, and which area they visit remotely, as long as you have installed loggers on these animals. So biologging devices provide various data useful for marine conservation. So for example, satellite telemetry devices are deployed on any animal. And in this case, we are talking about this is a seal that has a gadget on has a gadget or rather a telemetry, and this gadget record and transmit data on the computer, showing where their location. It can also show the dive activities. It can show, and therefore it can actually even give indication of their behavior, which can be used to answer a range of questions relevant to conservation management of marine mammals. So the other technology, and this could be the last one, is the application of habitat preference modeling. So we do modeling using, you can have, actually it's combination of biologging and telemetry, once you have studied the behavior or the distribution of animals and you know where they are visiting, then you can use that hard data and you model it so that you can actually use it to do projection or prediction of where probably animals are expected to be in certain period of the year. That's how we get to know that maybe certain species, dolphins or whales, will be visiting certain areas in a specific period of time, or which months are the best time, maybe even for tourists to come and actually see the migration of whales or of whatever marine mammal. So application of habitat preference modeling is actually used hand in hand with the biologging data set. So the aim of modeling technology is to quantify the link between species presence and abundance, as well as the environmental covariates. So for marine mammals, the modeled relationship are often used to predict seed distribution of the population. You can tell, you can project or predict when to expect migration of certain animals to take place in which particular region. So the predicted distribution are used to identify priority areas and conservation management. For example, you can use this technology to enhance closure of certain areas because it's already known that these particular animals will be visiting, are expected to be visiting certain areas during a specific period of the year. And therefore, you can use this technology to enhance other management measures like closure of certain areas. To avoid, for example, bycatch mitigation. So you can use this technology to inform bycatch mitigation measures that you'd want to put in place, like closure of certain marine areas for a given period of time to disallow bycatch problems. So what you have here, for example, is the location. You can use this to model the location of blue whales tracked using satellite monitor radio tags. So that the whales are actually tagged, and these animals are able to transmit that information on a daily basis. And this has been done in this case for a long period of time, since 1994 to 2000. That's when they came up with this distribution of the whales from how they distribute, how they move from where they were tagged. So what you have here shows that their location of where the whales were tagged, and the color shading basically shows indicating the number of tagged whales. So the blue indicating that only probably one whale was tagged. The other one shows 2 to 5 whales were tagged, and the areas with red shows that there were so many animals. Between 30 to 47 animals were tagged, and therefore you can actually see that it shows how those animals distribute within the marine waters. So the area that are indicated in red, these areas here that I'm showing with the arrow, basically indicate the areas where the tagging was deployed. After the animals were tagged, you can actually see how far they have moved. They have moved, some of them have moved all the way from this location all the way as far as this. So they move thousands of kilometers and they still come back and visit the same sites. That's how we get to know that they are migrating for so very long distance, or they are residents. So we have some marine mammals that probably are sedentary, or they are resident of certain marine regions, and while some could be migrating as far as this far. So because you can imagine these animals, all these animals that were tagged here, they were only tagged in 3 areas. They either were tagged here, here, or here. But when you look at their distribution for that long period between 1994 to 2008, you can see that they have been able to move far and wide. And with that kind of prediction, it's actually very possible to know how certain animals, or in this case, the whales, utilize which part of the sea. And when you look, you can see that there is high concentration around this region here as compared to these other region outside here, meaning they utilize this area more than other areas. And therefore, when you are setting up, for example, the MPA, or you want to regulate the fishing activities, you can actually use this modeled data to ensure that these kind of areas, for example, should be avoided during certain period of the year by disallowing probably fishing activities to take place around this area in given period of time when we expect that these particular animals will be concentrating around this area around that time. So similarly, the other approach that can also be used is the prediction of the likelihood of blue whale occurrence. So this figure basically shows the prediction of the likelihood that the whale will occur in a given area. Then it is modeled so that it can inform decision as to when you'd expect high chances of finding or the occurrence of, let's say, the whales. So the area that is marked in red here, or if you will, orange, that shows the highest prediction that this area is the chances that you'll come across the whales around that area very high around this region here. So these two figures basically shows the prediction of modeling that can be used hand in hand with the data logging technology. So that marks the end of today's lecture, and I'd like to ask if you have any clarification you'd want me to make as regards the management intervention that are being used on marine mammals. So when you look at these prediction, especially on modeling. So this is just an example of what is being used on blue whales, but this is a technology that can be applied on any species that is of concern. So such that if the species that is of concern, for example, in our case, are the dolphins, it's actually very possible to actually tag these animals and be able to tell when and where they visit and in a given period of the year. So is there any question? Hello? Everyone seemed to be very quiet today.
We are present. We are in.
So these are management strategies that are being used to manage marine mammals is not exhaustive. Right now, we have only mentioned about 11 management strategies. And these are the same strategies that I think I must have told you to go and do a reading assignment on the rays and sharks, because most of these strategies are species specific. The strategies that are being used on marine mammals, for example, may not necessarily be the same strategies that can be used on other species. But there are some of these strategies sometimes applies across the board. For example, when you look at the sea turtles, most of the strategies that we have mentioned here are still applied on those animals. For example, when it comes to tagging, when it comes to sea turtle exclusion devices, all these, they still apply the same kind of strategies to ensure that those particular marine animals that are threatened are protected against those threats. So we'll continue from there next week. I still have maybe a few other strategies that we can share during the next class. But for now, I would like you to take this opportunity to focus on your assignment, or rather the card that I gave, so that you can use the remaining time to start working on that, such that by Friday, I want the assignment submitted, and make sure that you follow the instruction that I gave. Is there any clarification as far as the strategies are concerned? So remind me, Mbudia, I have 2 or so references I'd like to share with you. So make sure, just in case I forget, I think I had promised to share one of the very recent publication by some scientists, I think from Turtle Watch, that were looking at the cetaceans monitoring. And actually, one of the strategies that I have not mentioned, and probably I'll be doing that next week, is the use of the societal engagement and applying what we call citizen science in monitoring, so that considering that monitoring of the marine mammal is very complex, and therefore sometimes it's difficult to dedicate to just allow only scientists to monitor. You have to engage all stakeholders, and that's what we are referring as citizen science, where you engage the non-expert to help you in monitoring. And that is a strategy that has been used in monitoring most of the marine mammals, where any sighting that is done, that is noted, anybody can actually record and also submit the presence or sightings of those animals anywhere, so that that can be captured and verified using, let's say, apps. You can have an app that can actually transmit that we have spotted sea whales, or we have spotted whatever species that is of concern in certain areas. So if there are no questions today, For some reason today, everyone is very quiet. All right. So see you tomorrow, not next week.